The message came through while the siren was screaming. Your employment has been terminated. Effective immediately. The phone vibrated once in my palm, bright and indifferent, while the ambulance cut through traffic. My daughter lay beside me, her skin pale, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. The paramedic spoke calmly about dosage and response times, but his words barely registered. All I could see were those 7 words on my screen. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I put the phone face down and wrapped my fingers tighter around my daughter's hand. 4 hours earlier, I'd been in the conference room at Northwell Impact Group, finalizing the partner briefing I had spent 3 months building. Metrics, verification trails, community audits, every line had my fingerprints on it. Then the school nurse called. Peanut exposure, severe reaction, ambulance already en route. When I told Caleb Rowan, my director, that I was leaving, his jaw tightened. You can't, he said. Not today. My daughter can't breathe, I replied, already grabbing my coat. He blocked the doorway for half a second too long. Then he stepped aside. Go, he said, calm, final. I should have recognized that tone. It wasn't understanding. It was replacement. What Caleb never understood was that I wasn't just another analyst. I built the validation framework behind every deal he proudly presented. I designed the system partners trusted because it could be verified quietly, independently, without spin. I assumed that mattered. In the emergency bay, doctors took my daughter from my arms. I sat alone on a plastic chair, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Termination still unopened in my inbox. By morning, there was a follow-up email: return your badge, return your laptop, no severance due to insubordination. That was when clarity settled in. Not anger, not panic, precision. Because the reports I had flagged days earlier, the ones showing results that shouldn't yet exist, were not mistakes. They were fabrications, and embedded in every report was something Caleb never noticed. A pathway, 72 hours later. While my daughter slept safely at home. My phone rang. This is Eleanor Shaw, partner at Horizon Bridge Capital. The voice said, we followed your verification trail, and we need to talk. How are you feeling right now? Honestly, stories like this can stir up a lot if it does. Maybe take a moment to step toward a window and let some natural light in. Sometimes that small shift helps more than we expect. I'm curious, where are you listening from today if this story feels real to you? You're not alone. And I'd love for you to stay with me by subscribing so we can keep going together. Because what happened next wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, deliberate, and it changed everything. Eleanor suggested a quiet cafe, not an office. That alone told me this wasn't routine. Partners who control hundreds of millions don't usually leave their towers unless something has already gone wrong. She arrived early, no laptop open, no assistant hovering nearby, just a thin folder placed carefully on the table between us. We followed the verification pathway in your reports, she said without preamble. Not the summaries, the back-end logic. I nodded once. I already knew what she was going to say. Our team visited 3 communities listed as fully implemented. None of the programs existed. No facilities, no staff, no beneficiaries. The local leaders recognized your name, but not your company. She paused. Watching my reaction, I felt nothing sharp, just a steady alignment of facts clicking into place. I was terminated 3 days ago, I said evenly, while I was in an ambulance with my daughter. Eleanor's expression tightened, not with sympathy, with calculation. That explains the timing, she said. Your director accelerated something he didn't understand. She slid the folder toward me. Inside were printed photographs, handwritten notes, and timestamps, independent confirmations. My verification system had worked exactly as designed. It had simply waited for someone serious enough to use it. We represent one of Northwell's largest strategic partnerships, Eleanor continued, and we've already paused capital deployment. I met her eyes. Paused isn't the same as withdrawn. No, she agreed. Not yet. She leaned forward slightly. We want to know one thing before we decide what happens next. Were you aware the data was being altered? I said, but I knew it was possible. That's why the system exists. Eleanor exhaled once, slow and controlled. Good, because we're not interested in punishing negligence. We're interested in accountability. She didn't offer me a job. She didn't apologize on behalf of the industry. She asked me to walk her through the architecture, how impact was meant to be measured, how false claims inevitably exposed themselves over time. I explained calmly. No drama, no bitterness. When I finished, she closed the folder. There's a partner review call scheduled in 72 hours, she said. Northwell believes it's a routine update. It won't be. I didn't ask what she needed from me. She answered anyway. We want you on that call, Eleanor said. Not as an employee, as the original architect. Silent, if you prefer, but present. I thought of my daughter at home, coloring quietly at the kitchen table. I thought of the message that had ended 6 years of loyalty in 7 words. I'll be there, I said. But I won't speak unless I'm asked. Eleanor smiled not warmly, but with respect. That's exactly why this will work. As I left the cafe, my phone buzzed again. An internal Northwell calendar invite. Mandatory partner alignment executive level. They still thought they were in control. They had no idea the system they ignored was already doing its job. I joined the partner call without a camera. No greeting, no introduction. Just a muted square in the corner of the screen. My name listed without a title. That was deliberate. Visibility changes behavior. I wanted them unguarded. Caleb's voice filled the audio first, confident, smooth, rehearsed. He spoke about alignment, about momentum, about accelerated impact. The phrases stacked neatly on top of each other, polished and hollow. I recognized the cadence. It was the one he used when he believed no one in the room could challenge him. Eleanor said nothing. Neither did the other partners. And that was the first fracture. Caleb kept talking, unaware that silence was already being logged, not emotionally, procedurally, in partner governance. Unanswered questions and unchallenged claims don't disappear. They accumulate. They become timestamps. He shared slides I had once built modified, simplified, stripped of context, charts showing outcomes that could not exist yet, communities labeled stabilized, programs marked completed. Then Eleanor spoke. Before we proceed, she said evenly, can you clarify which third-party verifier confirmed these results? There it was. Caleb didn't hesitate. Our internal impact team validated all data before publication. I almost smiled. Internal. Eleanor repeated. Not independent. A pause. Short, measured. Our framework allows for internal verification, not under the agreement we signed. Another voice cut in. Calm, male. One of the other partners. Clause 7 requires external confirmation for milestone-based disbursement. Caleb adjusted quickly. Those confirmations are pending. The outcomes themselves are real. Still, no one looked at me. Eleanor waited exactly 2 seconds before continuing. We followed the verification pathway included in your reports, she said. The one embedded beneath the summaries. The room shifted. Caleb hesitated. Just long enough. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he said. That was the second fracture. Then allow me to clarify. Eleanor replied. Your reports invite partners to validate outcomes directly through listed community contacts. We did. None confirmed implementation. Caleb laughed once, softly, with respect. Partners visiting communities independently can cause confusion. Those conversations are informal. They weren't. Eleanor said. They were documented. Another pause, longer this time, and, she added, we noticed that the architect of that verification system is present on this call. That was when my name appeared highlighted. Caleb finally saw me. He straightened. Maris is no longer with the firm. I'm aware. Eleanor said, That's not the question. Silence followed. Not awkward, not emotional, decisive, in that quiet. Something irreversible happened. Because systems don't respond to excuses, they respond to records. And everything Caleb had said, every deflection, every assumption was now part of one. Eleanor concluded calmly, We're initiating a partner review. Effective immediately. The call ended without argument. I stayed seated long after the screen went dark. Outside my kitchen window, the afternoon light had shifted. My daughter laughed softly from the other room, unaware that a company had just lost control without anyone raising their voice. The reckoning hadn't arrived yet, but it had started. The aftermath didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with emails. Not messages to me, messages about me, copied threads, forwarded inquiries, quiet requests for clarification that all pointed in the same direction. Partners weren't accusing Northwell yet. They were documenting. Caleb called twice that evening. I didn't answer. By morning, the language shifted. A formal notice went out to senior leadership partner review, initiated cooperation required. It wasn't punitive. That was the dangerous part. Reviews don't need intent. They only need discrepancies. Eleanor called once. They're scrambling internally, she said, trying to reconstruct data trails they never owned. I pictured Caleb hunched over dashboards, asking analysts questions he should have asked months ago, pulling files that no longer aligned, discovering that the summaries he'd trusted had no spine. They asked for your original documentation. Eleanor added. I exhaled slowly. You already have it. Yes, she said. But they don't know that yet. That mattered. Because Northwell's entire defense assumed I was the sole point of failure, a former employee, a convenient absence. They didn't realize the system had never belonged to them. It lived in partner-facing architecture, mirrored, time-stamped, immutable, by mid-morning. Legal entered the conversation. Not threats, not accusations, questions, carefully phrased, narrowly scoped. Was Maris Dean authorized to design the verification pathway? Had modifications been made post-submission? Who approved milestone declarations? Each question carried weight. Each answer narrowed the field. Caleb finally reached me through a private number. Maris, he said, voice strained. We need to talk. I'm listening, I replied. I didn't ask about reinstatement. I didn't mention my daughter. I didn't mention the ambulance. You know how these reviews work, he continued. They escalate quickly. If there's something you haven't shared, there isn't, I said calmly. Everything relevant is already logged. Silence. What do you want? He asked. That question told me everything. I want nothing. I replied, I'm not involved. That's not true. He snapped. I designed a system that works. I said, what you did with it wasn't my decision. He hung up. By that afternoon, partners had suspended new disbursements, not pulled suspended. Enough to freeze momentum, enough to make boards nervous, enough to invite regulators into rooms they hadn't planned to open. And still, no one blamed me publicly. That came later. For now, Northwell was facing something worse than scandal. Verification. At home. My daughter sat at the table drawing loops and squares. Are you working again? She asked. Sort of, I said. She nodded seriously. Quiet work? Yes. I smiled. Very quiet work. That evening. Eleanor sent one last message. They've requested an independent audit. External. Full scope. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Audits don't care about confidence. They care about records. And Northwell had just invited one inside. The audit announcement changed the tone overnight. Before, Northwell had been cautious, measured emails, controlled language, procedural calm. After the request went public among partners, the posture shifted from quiet correction to visible defense. That's when the narrative started. An internal memo leaked first. Not to me about me. It framed my departure as performance-related. hinted at failure to prioritize responsibilities, and referenced my absence during a critical partner presentation. The ambulance wasn't mentioned. My daughter wasn't mentioned. Emergencies rarely are. When they don't fit the story, Eleanor forwarded it without commentary. I expected this. I replied, and I had. When systems fail, people don't look for causes. They look for shapes. Someone to point at. Someone conveniently no longer inside the building. By midweek, a former colleague called quietly. They're asking who had access to the raw data. She said, "Your name keeps coming up." Of course it does. I answered, "It always will, because accountability moves downhill until it hits resistance." Northwell's legal team reached out next, not hostile, just probing. They wanted to clarify boundaries, what data I retained, what documentation I might possess, whether I'd shared proprietary materials externally. I answered once, in writing, precisely. I retained nothing beyond what partners already possessed under shared governance agreements. I shared nothing outside established verification pathways. I had no interest in commentary. That last line mattered, because the moment you speak emotionally, you become subjective. I refused to give them that. Caleb tried again. This time, the call came late. Too late. The hour where urgency bleeds through control. "You're letting this spiral," he said. "You know how these things end." "I do," I replied. "They end when the records stop contradicting the claims. That audit will tear everything open." He snapped. "You built the system. You know that." "Yes." I said, "That was the point." He exhaled sharply. "You could help contain this." I didn't respond. "Maris," he pressed. "If you testify informally that the discrepancies were transitional, I won't." I said evenly. There was a long pause. Then, quieter, "Think about your future." I did. I thought about my daughter's steady breathing as she slept, about the fluorescent lights in the emergency bay, about how quickly loyalty had been reduced to inconvenience. "My future doesn't require your containment," I said. He hung up. 2 days later, the audit firm issued its first request list. Not accusations, requests, original datasets, edit histories, authorization logs, milestone approvals, every item traced back to decisions made after my last submission. That wasn't coincidence. It was architecture, at home. I closed my laptop early and sat with my daughter while she finished her homework. She looked up at me suddenly. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm just letting the truth finish speaking." She considered that, then nodded. Satisfied. The loud part was coming, but the outcome had already been decided quietly. The moment control slipped. The audit didn't move fast, it moved thoroughly. That distinction mattered, because speed gives people room to perform. Thoroughness gives them nowhere to hide. By the second week, Northwell's leadership stopped pretending this was internal. Calendar blocks disappeared. Meetings were postponed pending review. Partners who once praised alignment now asked for written confirmations instead of calls. That's when the pressure began to surface in unexpected places. A former analyst reached out first. She'd transferred teams months earlier. "They're asking us to reconstruct impact narratives," she said quietly. "Not the data, just the story." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Are they asking you to change anything? They're asking us to phrase things more confidently." Confidence. The last refuge. 2 days later, an executive I barely knew emailed me directly. Polite, almost warm. He suggested coffee to clear the air. I declined. The audit team didn't need reconciliation. They needed consistency. Eleanor called that evening. "They're failing preliminary alignment checks." She said, not catastrophically, but repeatedly. "What does that mean in practice?" I asked. "It means nothing matches cleanly." She replied, "Every answer creates another question." That was the danger of layered fabrication. It looks efficient until someone insists on walking through it slowly. Northwell tried to regain control by accelerating something else. They announced a new initiative. Press release. Carefully worded, forward-looking. No mention of paused funding or audits. Just optimism. Reframed as leadership. I read it once. They had reused my framework again. Not the verification this time, but the language. The moral scaffolding. Promises of measurable outcomes and partner transparency. They were trying to outpace scrutiny with narrative. It wouldn't work, because audits don't read press releases. They read logs. That afternoon, Eleanor forwarded a short note. One of their secondary partners requested a separate call. Privately, on the call, the partner didn't accuse anyone. He asked a single question. "If this audit concludes the way it's trending," he said, "are there viable alternatives already structured?" Eleanor didn't answer. I did. "Yes," I said calmly, "but they won't look familiar." Silence followed. I explained briefly. Direct funding channels, independent oversight, community-first timelines, no branding urgency, no compressed metrics. "This already exists," he asked. "It exists where it's needed," I replied, "not where it's advertised." He thanked us and ended the call. That night, my daughter asked if I'd be going back to an office soon. "No," I said. "I don't think so." She seemed relieved. "Good. Offices make you tired." She wasn't wrong. The next morning, the audit team issued a supplemental request. Expanded scope, deeper access, broader authority. Northwell's legal department pushed back. Partners didn't. That was the moment priorities became visible, because when pressure rises, organizations reveal what they value most: speed or accuracy, appearance or substance. Northwell chose appearance, and the system responded accordingly. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once before answering. Experience had taught me that urgency sounds different when it's genuine. "Maris Dean," the voice asked. "Male? Older? Measured?" "Yes." "This is Daniel Cross, senior partner at Redwood Alliance. We've worked with Northwell for 8 years. I stayed quiet. We weren't part of the original review group. He continued. "But when capital freezes start rippling, people notice. They do." I agreed. Daniel didn't waste time. "We've reviewed the audit request list independently." That caught my attention. And your name appears exactly where it shouldn't," he said. "At the beginning, not the end." I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. "That suggests 2 possibilities," he went on. "Either you orchestrated a very elaborate deception and forgot to benefit from it, or you built something honest that was later misused. I know which one I'd bet on." I said, "So do we." Daniel replied, "But betting isn't enough." He explained that Redwood Alliance had quietly commissioned their own internal risk assessment, not of Northwell's numbers, but of their process integrity. They traced decision authority, data ownership, and revision rights. What they found unsettled them. "Every alteration was approved above your level," Daniel said. "Every acceleration bypassed the safeguards you designed." Which means, I asked, "It means the exposure isn't operational." He said, "It's governance." That word carries weight in rooms where funding decisions are made. "We have a board meeting in 48 hours," Daniel continued. "Northwell believes it's about patience. It isn't." I didn't ask what he wanted. He told me anyway. "We're considering a full withdrawal," he said. "But more importantly, we're considering where that capital goes next." There it was. "We don't want another Northwell," Daniel added. "We want something structurally different." I thought of the cafe, Eleanor's folder, the quiet alignment forming between people who valued verification over velocity. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "A conversation," he said. "With you, Eleanor, and 2 others who've been watching quietly." I agreed. After the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't vindication, it was redirection. That evening, Eleanor confirmed what I already suspected. "They're losing narrative control," she said. Partners are no longer asking if they're asking after what I asked. After Northwell, she replied. At home, my daughter spread her homework across the table. Humming softly, I watched her concentrate, utterly unconcerned with capital flows or governance failures. She looked up. You're smiling? I am, I said, surprised to find it true. Is it a good problem? She asked. Yes, I answered. It's a problem about fixing things. The meeting with Redwood was scheduled for the following morning. Northwell didn't know it yet, but the conversation had already moved on. The Redwood meeting wasn't held in a boardroom. It took place in a small conference space attached to a public library, glass walls. Neutral light, no branding. That choice was intentional. Serious conversations don't need spectacle. Daniel arrived with two others. No assistants, no decks. Eleanor joined a minute later, nodding once in greeting. We sat without ceremony. Daniel opened a thin notebook. We're here because the audit changed how we evaluate risk, he said. Not financial risk, structural risk. He looked directly at me. Northwell's issue isn't falsified data alone. It's that their system rewards speed over truth. No one disagreed. We want to understand what it looks like when truth is non-negotiable. He continued. Operationally, legally, culturally. I answered carefully. Not aspirationally. I explained that integrity isn't enforced by value statements. It's enforced by friction, by systems that slow you down when you try to move faster than reality allows, verification pathways that can't be skipped, community confirmations that don't report upward but outward. Daniel listened without interruption. And if a director wants to override a safeguard, one of the others asked, they can. I said. But the override becomes visible, logged, reviewable. Overrides don't break the system, they expose the decision-maker. That seemed to land, Eleanor added. What Northwell misunderstood is that transparency doesn't protect you from scrutiny. It prepares you for it. Silence followed. The good kind. The kind where people are recalibrating. Daniel closed his notebook. We're not interested in acquiring anything, he said. No mergers, no rebrands. He paused. We're interested in funding something new. Quietly, with the right constraints. I felt the shape of it forming. Not a company, a framework. What happens to Northwell, one of them asked me. I don't decide that. I replied. Systems don't punish, they reveal. Daniel smiled slightly. That's consistent with what the auditors said. We discussed governance next. Not leadership titles, but veto structures. Who could stop a decision? And under what conditions? How power was distributed when things went wrong. By the end, nothing had been promised, which told me everything. Outside, Eleanor walked with me toward the exit. They're serious, she said. I know, I replied. They didn't try to impress us. That afternoon, my phone lit up with a notification. Northwell Impact Group Executive restructuring announcement pending. It hadn't been released yet. Someone wanted partners to know before the press did, by evening. The audit team issued an interim finding. No conclusions, just a sentence that mattered. Material discrepancies identified at governance level. That phrasing doesn't make headlines. It changes careers. At home, my daughter asked if we were still going to the park the next day. Yes. I said, nothing's changed. She smiled, relieved. And that was the truth. The world of capital was shifting quietly, slowly, away from noise and toward accountability. Northwell still thought the problem was damage control. They hadn't realized yet that the conversation had already moved on, and it wasn't coming back. The partner call was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. Northwell framed it as a realignment update. The phrasing alone told me how far behind they were. Realignment implies control. This wasn't that. I wasn't listed on the agenda. That was new. Eleanor forwarded the invite with a single line. Listen carefully. I joined early. Camera off again. The familiar grid filled in slowly. Executives, legal counsel, partner representatives. Caleb appeared last. His posture was rigid. The confidence he once wore so easily now looked practiced. He began with reassurance. "The audit process is progressing," he said. "We're cooperating fully and expect a swift resolution." No one interrupted. That was the problem. He moved to slides revised projections. Conservative language, phrases like course correction and forward governance. He spoke faster than usual, as if momentum itself might substitute for certainty. Then, a new voice joined the call. "This is Ruth Calder, representing Redwood Alliance," she said calmly. "Apologies for joining late." Caleb froze for half a beat. "Just enough. We weren't aware Redwood would be attending," he said. "You were informed yesterday," Ruth replied. "We requested observer status." She didn't wait for acknowledgement. "I'll be brief," she continued. "Redwood has completed its independent review." The room stilled. "Our conclusion aligns with the external audit's interim findings. The discrepancies are not operational errors. They are governance failures." Caleb opened his mouth. Ruth continued anyway. "As such, Redwood is withdrawing from all current and pending commitments with Northwell, effective immediately. No raised voices, no drama, just a statement." Another voice followed, then another. Each withdrawal was measured, professional, irreversible. By the time the fourth partner spoke, Caleb stopped taking notes. Someone asked about contingency plans. Ruth answered, "Capital will be reallocated," she said, "but not through structures that prioritize velocity over verification." That was the moment, because everyone on the call understood what that meant. Caleb tried once more. "If there are concerns about process, we're open to restructuring." "This isn't about restructuring," Ruth said gently. "It's about trust." She paused. "And trust is cumulative." The call ended sooner than scheduled. No vote, no argument. When the screen went dark, Eleanor let out a quiet breath. "That was decisive." She said, "Yes." I replied, "Because it wasn't emotional." My phone buzzed before I could stand. A message from Caleb. "We need to talk. Please." I didn't respond. That evening, the press release went out. Executive departures, strategic pause, commitment to transparency. The words were correct. The timing was too late. At home, my daughter asked why I was quiet. "I'm thinking," I said. "About work," she asked. "About what happens after." I replied. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Outside. The city moved on, unaware that a firm had just lost its future, not through scandal, but through scrutiny. Northwell would survive on paper for a while, but the partners had already chosen where the work would happen next. And for the first time since the ambulance ride, I felt something close to peace. 3 weeks later, Northwell's offices were still open, lights on, emails flowing, titles intact, but the real work had already left the building. Redwood and 2 other partners finalized their redirection quietly. No press conference, no new logos, just a lean structure, shared oversight, and funding tied to verification that couldn't be rushed or rewritten. They asked me to lead it, not as a savior, not as a symbol, as a steward. I accepted on one condition: no narratives, no hero stories, just systems that spoke for themselves. On my last interaction with Northwell, Caleb sent a single message. "You didn't have to let it go this far." I read it once, then deleted it, because I hadn't let anything go anywhere. I had simply stopped interfering with the truth. The new framework launched without announcement. Communities noticed first. Funds arrived when promised. Timelines made sense when something failed. It was logged, not hidden. That was enough. One afternoon, as I walked my daughter home from school, she asked, "Did the bad company disappear?" I said, "It just stopped being important." She seemed satisfied with that. We passed a construction site where a small community center was taking shape. Nothing dramatic, just concrete, wood, people working steadily. She pointed. Is that one of yours? It's one of ours. I corrected. Not mine. She smiled and skipped ahead. Later that night. I sat by the window. City lights steady in the distance. The memory of the ambulance siren felt far away, now not erased, but placed where it belonged. What stayed with me wasn't the firing. It was the clarity that followed. Systems don't need revenge. They need alignment. And when they finally get it, the noise fades, leaving only what was real enough to last. This story reminded me that integrity doesn't always make noise, but it always leaves a trace. I didn't win by fighting louder or faster. I won by staying steady when it mattered most, even when everything felt unfair. I'm curious, how did this story make you feel? Was there a moment or detail that stayed with you longer than the rest? And where are you listening from today if this journey resonated with you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe so we can keep these stories going together. 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 Stories going together.